Hi, Oscar McCook here. I am back with the Ugly Ducklings Alchemical Theater, Part 2, The Greatest Obstacle to Overcome. What we see here on the far right is Jacob's ladder a little bit blown up so that we can see more clearly. And in the middle, where the red arrow is pointing to, is the place of the heart, which is actually a place where three worlds meet. Keter from Asiya, the world of action, Tiferet from the world of formation, and the kingdom from the world of creation. Before getting started, I would like to read from 1 Corinthians. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. This is one of the difficulties we're going to encounter as we try to move up Jacob's ladder, is that there has to be a transformation. We've been working on it. That's what the last introductory presentation was about. And here I actually somehow, what comes to mind is the Queen of Hearts in Alice in Wonderland screaming, off with their heads, off with their heads. Because in essence, there's a requirement for a mystical decapitation. The head, or the natural human reason, is inadequate for apprehending the sublime spirit, according to Wilmshurst. The highest wisdom is to know nothing. As we plan on entering Tiferet, the place of the heart, we must enter through three channels. They're represented here by the following three tarot cards: the card of the devil, key 15, the card of temperance, key 14, and key 13, the card of death. On the far right, we can see where they fall on this tree of life representing the world of formation. And the first path we encounter is the path of Ayin, corresponding to the card of the devil. The path of Ayin is entered through Hod, the eighth sphere, but we left off on the sphere of Netzach, moving up and working on the four sephiras that represent our personality structure. This implies that we must travel back from Netzach, where we see here the the Empress, to Hod, where we see represented by the magician. And that path, of course, is the path of Pe, the tower. Thus, a total, unavoidable, catastrophic upheaval awaits when we try to cross that again. It's a complete destruction of any egocentric notions of separation that are still clinging from the lower mental plane. Remember the four sephiras that comprise what we've called the lower mental plane, or the personality structures, also represent our four elements. Malkuth, the kingdom earth, which had its own four elements that we had to work on. Yesod, the foundation, air. Hod, water. And Netzach, fire. So resolving this first psychic knot represented by the tower will involve linking fire and water. This is a very busy slide. To remind us where we were, it's circled there in red. What's interesting is I've added the card of strength, key 8, partly due to the fact that it shares number identity with the 8th sphere. What is even more interesting, that it represents the first stage of spiritual unfoldment, as is displayed in the tarot tableau from Windover in Tarot Revelations, published by Paul Foster Case. In the tableau, the first row, where the magicians stand, represent principles. The second, laws and agency. And the third, the outcome, the effect. And this third bottom row represents the stages of unfoldment. This combination of three represents the first stage of spiritual unfoldment. I'll mention the intelligence associated with each of the cards. The magician is a transparent intelligence. Strength represents the intelligence of the secret of all spiritual activities. And key 15, the devil, represents the renewing intelligence. What's more is this first stage of spiritual unfoldment is somehow related to the ascent from Hod to Tiferet through these cards, key 1, key 8, through numerical identity with Hod, and key 15, which represents the path that we need to travel. Ayin, corresponding to the 26th path, and the card of the devil, the renewing intelligence, literally means eye, color, and fountain, according to Ginsburg in the Hebrew letters. The devil, the letter Ayin, also represents the doorkeeper, the dweller on the threshold. Interestingly, on the far right, we see on this tree where the card of Ayin, the path of Ayin, and its corresponding card, the devil, would lie. And above that path, or below that card, we see that Warren writes threshold. In this path of pay that unites Netzach to Hod. What's interesting and is paralleled to the specific area is that we have, as we attempt to move up to Tiferet in Yetzirah, we discover the relationships that are fascinating because this Tiferet, the place where three worlds meet, represented just above, also represents the first heaven, according to Warren, the kingdom of heaven. It represents the archangel Sandalphon and the Christ force. In the Transformational Tarot, the book that Shirley wrote to go along with her tarot cards, she tells us regarding the number 6 that it represents the Christ force. Numerically speaking, we have here the opportunity to express wholeness in our daily lives, to manifest Christ-like actions. The devil, 15 equals 6, is here to teach us how to accomplish this. 30 years ago, when I first read that, I wasn't too enthralled about that, nor could I really make some sense of what it implies. But I remembered that in the Bible, in the New Testament, it says, Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And I saw a little bit of resonance in Shirley's statement. Here I want to reflect on the Lord's Prayer a little bit. Our Father, Teresa de Avila, Saint Teresa de Avila, she would go into ecstasy just on those two words. She couldn't continue reciting the prayer. Just our Father. But I want us to focus now on the last lines. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Something bothered me about those words since I was young. We start off with saying, Our Father, and we end by saying, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. What What for a father would lead us into temptation? To be honest, I was a bit confused. Here on the bottom, we have key of temperance, the archangel Michael, and the key of the devil, Oriel, archangel Oriel. And an interesting numerical association comes up. We see that 14 reduces to 5, and that 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, the theosophical extension of 5, adds to 15, implying that there's an identity that may not be readily visible between these two keys. More interestingly, temperance unites the moon and the sun, foundation, and the sphere that we're moving to. And testing, of course, unites Hod to the sun, to Tifereth. On the far right, we see that fifth tree representing that calf. I've placed the tarot keys there so we can see where those paths relate to. But more interesting things come up as we focus on that calf. For me at the moment, it's just to remind me in my times of doubt that I'm always connected, that regardless of what I'm going through, I am always connected to the crown. From the place of the kingdom to the place of the crown, there's a line. There's a line that connects me. Fascinatingly, I happened to compare the King James Version with the New King James Version and found it fascinating to see that, and do not lead us into temptation, was pretty much the same, but deliver us from the evil one. Now, this is fascinating to me. The New King James Version is from 1982. Fortunately, I was born a few years before that, so I grew up with the King James Version. What we see here is something, a concept of evil has been anthropomorphized, converted into the evil one, as if it has gained more ground, and now it's a one. It's just something to think about. The devil himself makes no sense. It's a chimera, incongruous, chaotic expression of the four elements. But that's not how we relate to it on a normal basis. Here's an example of how the four elements are represented. On the far left, you see the earth sign, Saturn in his open hand, saying, "What you see is all there is." Water represented by the eagle's talons, representing Scorpio. The bat wings, Finsternus, the prince of the powers of the air. And the fire by the inverted torch. A chaotic ordering of the four elements. It's a lot more on this card, but this is its introduction. Be ye therefore, wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Matthew 10:16. In Genesis 3:1, the serpent was more subtle. Arum. This word should be familiar to us from our previous presentation. Than any other beast of the field. Arum, cunning, crafty, and this is not in a negative sense, is equivalent to naked, which we discussed before from Genesis 2:25 to 3:6-7. Although this time the yod is left out. Interesting things to consider. The serpent conceals the true nature of things by seeming to reveal them uncovered, naked. It presents itself to us openly without concealment. Every visible form is a veil of concealment for a hidden truth. Every visible form is a veil of concealment for a hidden truth. Revealing by concealing, for those of you interested, was excellently expounded by Elliot Wolfson and his language, eros, being, Kabbalistic hermeneutics, and poetic imagination. Understand the subtlety of the serpent power. Turn it into good use. Do not be taken in by the apparent openness of external conditions. Recall that the disciples were known as good serpents. Again, be ye wise as serpents and harmless as doves was the admonition. The motion of the serpent power is serpentine, wavy and undulating, a spiritual force, yet vibratory, a rhythmic vibration. The caduceus of Hermes are two intertwined snakes. They show the movement of the serpent power within our body. Here I bring us back to a point we were earlier at. Father and mother are perpetually conjoined in Yesod, but concealed under the mystery of Dot. Our conscious awareness of unity is concealed under the mystery of knowledge. So I wanted to find out a little bit more about knowledge. Here I use the tarot keys that correspond to the Hebrew letters so that I can gain a little bit more insight into knowledge. Daleth is represented by key 3, the Empress, Ayin, the Devil, and Tav, the key of the world. I find it significant and important to look carefully at the cards and how they show us mysteries and reflect aspects of being that are not always immediately apparent. When we move to the middle of this slide, this diagram, we see that Dath is alone and disconnected in the portion of this tree that I have here outlined in black and white. The black circle in the center of that face, that kite formation that we see topped by Kether, Chochmah, and Binah, that black circle is the abyss. Chochmah and Binah, being perpetually combined in Yesod, would have made the primal triad across the abyss accessible. But we see in this tree in the middle that there are no paths to Yesod or from Yesod because it's by itself. This is the beauty of Jacob's ladder. On the far right, we see the same structure, but now intercalated with the world of creation. We're looking here at the world, the lower face of the world of formation, which connects also with the world of action in red below. And this section that we're looking at where that in the middle, where that black dot, it's alone and without apparent pathways leading to it, we see that when formation overlaps with that part of the world of Asiya, Yesod creates two paths from Yesod to Netzach on the right and from Yesod to Hod on the left, which are not available in the middle tree, which stands alone. Warren, in his Kabbalistic universe, tells us the foundation, Yesod, in this case, Yesod from formation, transforms and imparts the image of knowledge through Dath. But what image? Separation, seen here in the middle panel, or unity, seen on the right? Well, if we think about what he had just said, the foundation transforms and imparts the image of knowledge through Dot, then in that single isolated tree, that would be impossible. We need Jacob's ladder, which shows the intercalation of the four worlds, the unity of being that is represented through our Kav. Oh, the slide just got even busier. On the left, to make some order of this, what we see is something remarkable that is displayed through the numbering of the tarot cards. We see that 3, through theosophical extension, will be equal to 6. 6, on the other hand, through that same extension, adds to 21, which reduces to 3. So, in essence, what we're seeing here is that there is an identity by each one of these tarot keys. The 3 that represents the Empress is identical to the 21, which reduces to 3, the world. And both 3s, through extension, give us 6, which is the reduction of 15, the devil. And the 6 in extension brings us back to the 3. So it shows us that beyond the surface appearances, there is a numerical relationship that helps us understand a little bit more of this mystery of the word Dath. Above in the middle panel now we read the powers of subconsciousness in Yesod. We must then look to the far right because Yesod doesn't exist on this lower tree, at least not at the place where it would give us direct access to the same powers associated with Chokmah and Binah. In my mind, the only way that can work is in Jacob's ladder, which provides us two separate channels from Yesod to the Sephiras that represent mother and father, and Hod and Netzach. Here, I want to change our focus a little bit and look at how the card of the Empress, which represents Venus, and in Hebrew, Noga, which means brightness. And this is appropriate, for the card of Venus represents in this path, the 14th path, the luminous intelligence, which on the far right we see way up at the place of the supernals. But the place for the activity of Venus is in the place of Netzach. So let's see what Nathaniel Berman, in his PhD thesis, Improper Twins, the Ambivalent Other Side in the Zohar and Kabbalistic tradition, has to say. He says that Venus, or Noga, partakes of both holiness and unholiness, a kind of bridge between the two realms. And he adds, Noga is used to refer to the Shekinah in the Rayach Mechanama, part of the Sohar. Elliot Wolfson in Heidegger and Kabbalah, Hidden Gnosis and the Path of Poesis tells us that three shells surrounding the holiness, and the fourth is radiance, Noga, again a reflection pointing to the luminosity. And the fourth, its radiance. Sometimes it is in holiness, and sometimes it returns to the shell. So intriguing observations regarding Noga, who in our scheme falls not only on Netzach, but on the 14th path, uniting Chokhmah and Binah. Intriguing. On this tree on the far right, I've placed our three cards that spell Doth. We see that Saturn holds more than one place, as well as Venus. Ayin is only in that path between Hod and Tiferet. But even more interesting, when we're looking at here, I've shortened it so it can fit on the screen, our central panel here that shows us the calf that unites the crown to the kingdom. Netzach falls appropriately on the fifth place, moving up from Malkuth. I'm sorry, on the fourth sphere, moving up from Malkuth towards the crown. And what's intriguing about that is the face that it represents on this Jacob's ladder, on this fifth tree of Jacob's ladder. The kite face that is centered on is equivalent to the ego, the place of the moon, the high priestess. Hmm. The correspondences are simply fascinating and worthy of contemplation. Now, here I've brought up in the middle, a different ladder from Warren, where we're seeing angelic and archangelic presences. And what's intriguing to me is that Netzach, by gematria, is 148. That 148 shares correspondence and numeric identity with the Beni Elohim, the sons of Elohim. In Job 1:6 we read, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them." We see in that middle tree that the sphere of Hod, Binah, on our Jacob's ladder corresponds with the Beni Elohim. But what I want to draw our attention to is the fact that in Job 1:8, and the Lord, which is Yod He Vah He, said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God? And here the God represents the Elohim, and escheweth evil. What's significant to me here is that the Lord instigates the whole actions against Job. It's the Lord who says, Have you considered my servant Job, and how he escheweth evil? I had to look up this word eschew. It means to get away or keep away from something, from Merriam-Webster. I cite the website below. I had to look it up because I wasn't really sure what is meant by that. but it clarified to me Elliot Wolfson's statement in Luminal Darkness. The sin of Job was that he separated good and evil, not by clinging to evil, but rather by fleeing from it. Eschew. Both bring about the separation of forces that should be united. To switch gears to another aspect of Key 15, the devil, it's worthy to recognize it alchemically. Key 15 implies fermentation and leaven. In Exodus, Israel was told they could only eat unleavened bread, and that whosoever ate leavened bread, that soul shall be cut off from Israel. Wow, I thought that's a heck of a statement. That soul shall be cut off from Israel. Wolfson again in Liminal Darkness points out to us that upon leaving Egypt, the people of Israel were immersed in the demonic shells, and they had to remove all vestiges of evil, whereas the unleavened bread, the first gradation in the realm of holiness, the Shekinah, the dominion of the Holy One, was their medicine. Intriguingly, on Mount Sinai, after the people had received a higher type of bread, and Wolfson tells us this is symbolic of Tifereth, that this prohibition was no longer necessary. The very leaven that was forbidden on Passover was required on Pentecost. For a Christian like me, Pentecost is very significant as the day of the coming of the Holy Spirit. So it's very appropriate that leaven was recognized as a part of that Holy Spirit. Turning now to a different interpretation, a New Testament interpretation of leaven, and fermentation. But before we get there, it's interesting to point out that victory, Netzach 148, which we already saw, was very relevant earlier with regards to the Beni Elohim, is also equivalent to Kemach, flour or meal, suggesting that the seed of desire, Netzach, provides a clue to Jesus' parable of the leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal. I would say the 3 measures of meal represents the seats of our personal consciousness, what we have been currently working on since the last presentation. Yesod, Hod, and Netzach. These 3 spheres, these 3 sephiras that must receive the leaven from Tifereth. Note that Wolfson also mentioned the bread from Tifereth, through the channels we are now preparing to enter. Ayin, Samek, and Nun, represented by the card of the devil, the card of temperance, the card of death. The leaven which transforms our consciousness is the decapitation mentioned earlier. I still see that Queen of Hearts running around singing, "Off with their heads, off with their heads." It's no longer identifying with events and actions which occur through us rather than by us. It is achieving a level of transparency so that the divine may work through us. And from the Hebrew letters by Rabbi Ginsburg, we read, heart above and eyes below. One's heart is linked to the essence of God above. He is all. One's eyes are, as his, directed below to see, to reveal that all is he. This is in reference to the letter Ayin. One last time. Heart above and eyes below. One's heart is linked to the essence of God above. He is all. One's eyes are, as his, directed below to see, reveal that all is he. I thank you.